If you're a regular viewer of this show, which we know you are, you've probably heard us cite the Rural Mainstreet Index. The monthly report surveys bank presidents and CEOs in rural, agriculturally dependent areas in a 10-state region about economic conditions in their communities. The survey focuses on approximately 200 rural towns with an average population of 1,300 residents. This month's Rural Mainstreet Index rose for the first time since June. Creighton University economist Ernie Goss is an author of the study and joined us Monday to discuss the results. We asked Ernie about farmland prices, equipment sales, and how this point in 2013 compares to the same time period of last year.
I'd say, Jeff, okay, and I know that's not a good precise term, but what we're seeing, Jeff, according to our survey of bank CEOs in rural areas of 10 states, including Nebraska, the overall number is treading around softer growth. The agricultural economy is just not growing as fast now as it was this time last year. Of course, we're seeing agricultural commodity prices down fairly significantly. Of course, that's playing into the numbers. And also, of course, lots of things coming out of Washington or not coming out of Washington having some effects on what we call the rural Main Street economy.
As you look at the Fed stimulus policy and the QE3 that they're in right now, how does that relate to agriculture, interest rates, and commodity prices overall?
Boy, you know, Jeff, that's significant. I mean, in other words, the Federal Reserve has had the pedal to the metal, so to speak. They spewed out, I'll use that term, technical term, spewed out $3.5 trillion in additional bank funding by buying bonds. And of course what that's done is weakened the dollar, and it's tended to push up agricultural commodity prices. But what we've seen recently, despite all that stimulus from the federal government and from the Fed, agricultural commodity prices have softened quite significantly this year, and certainly in the last few months. And some of that's just coming from a slower growth from some of our trading partners, and slower U.S. growth as well.
So what I'm hearing from a lot of farmers is that there's a lot less grain sold now as it compares to where normally they would be. Do you think that's a dangerous position to be in, or is that okay?
Well, I think a lot of, now we asked that question as well from the bank CEOs about holding grain aside, and some of the farmers are in fact storing grain, waiting on some better prices. That's a risky strategy because it looks like agricultural commodity prices could head even lower. So in terms of overall ag income, it's going to be down this year from last year. And when we look at Nebraska, particularly Nebraska and South Dakota, where we had that significant snowstorm for October, that of course had some dramatic impacts on the livestock producers, particularly in South Dakota and western Nebraska as well, with the killing of cattle there from the snowstorm, and that'll spill over into the agricultural or the rural Main Street economy.
For those crop growers, one of the big input prices they've had to deal with is farm prices and the rising of those farm prices. Now, your index declined for the 9th time in 10 surveys. Is that an indication at all that we might have reached a peak?
Well, I think, Jeff, what it's showing is some of the errors coming out of that farm land price bubble. For example, 6 months ago, we asked the bankers about looking ahead for cash rents, the price that farmers pay to rent farmland. They indicated for the next year it will grow by 9.5%. We asked the same question this month, 2.5%. So we've gone from 9.5% expected growth to 2.5% expected growth in cash rent. So clearly, air is coming out of that farmland price bubble, and that's not such a bad thing. I think we were growing farmland prices at a pace that was unsustainable, so that's not such a bad thing.
Tell me where the equipment, the machinery, the large purchases, the big ticket items are, and what that could be a point of.
You know, Jeff, we've now recorded 3 straight months where the bank CEOs have reported pullbacks in purchases of agricultural equipment. And we're seeing that across the region. Farmers, as a result of less economic confidence, pulling back on their purchase of agricultural equipment, but also they've also purchased and done a lot of purchasing over the last several years, and of course they now have the equipment they need. So we've definitely seen a slowdown, much like farmland prices. We've seen agricultural equipment sales slowing down, in fact now negative for the last 3 months.
From your survey, can you gain an indication of if the lack of a farm bill has had any impact on the confidence of rural America?
Absolutely, Jeff. That's one of the things coming from the bankers, saying we need a farm bill, the certainty from a farm bill that's not temporary, that's not year to year, but 5 years out, say. And that's having some impacts. We asked the bankers about what they would recommend for a farm bill. One thing that comes through clearly from the bank CEOs, they would like to see a separation of the food stamp program or the SNAP program from the farm programs, but that's probably not going to happen. It looks like, as I see it, Congress is going to have a farm bill where those two are together going forward, and that of course is done not necessarily to have a good farm bill, it's actually to get votes, and that's what we're going to likely see.
I'll ask you a two-part question to close out here. How do you see 2013 ending and going into 2014? And the second part is, what can farmers watch for signs that the economy might be headed one way or the other?
I think, Jeff, we're going to continue to see the agricultural interest, the rural Main Street economy, the economy based upon agriculture, dependent on agriculture, slowing down somewhat. It's still going to be growing at a positive pace, but that pace is well down from this time next year. Going forward, I think certainly what farmers need to watch for, and what community leaders in these rural areas of Nebraska and the other 9 states that we survey need to be watching out for what the Fed does, the Federal Reserve, and what happens to interest rates. If we see interest rates heading higher, that would certainly cut into agricultural interest. We would see some pullbacks then, certainly in terms of agricultural equipment sales, but also in farmland prices. So keep an eye on long-term interest rates going forward. They've come down recently. That's a pretty good signal for agriculture, but going forward, that's the real key, is what happens to interest rates and how that affects, of course, agricultural commodity prices and the overall economy.